Hello, everyone. Today is Wednesday, July 28th. This is the Cluster API office hours. Thank you for joining us. And we'll go ahead and get started. As a reminder, please follow the CNCF Code of Conduct. If you'd like to participate, go ahead and raise your hand and I'll make sure you get your chance to talk. And be nice to everyone. Please be respectful, etc. All right, so let's get started. If you haven't already, go ahead and add your name to the attendee list. Let's get started with, I don't think we have any PSAs. Vince, do we have an update on releases? Like I know there's a 0321 patch that was released, and are we planning for 041?
It was 0322, if I remember correctly. Yeah, we got a bunch of, we got to one after another because there was a bug fix like that came in late. Yeah, 041, I think like we're almost there. Like the only thing left, it's actually a bumping controller runtime, which fixes a CVE in one of the dependencies, like around JWT. It doesn't actually affect us, but we got pinged to just remove that dependency. And so that's what we're waiting on right now. We're blocked on that.
Got it, thanks. Any questions about current releases from anyone? Okay, and do we have any other PSAs? Okay, if not, I guess release blocking, we should not have anything in there, although probably we should track that controller runtime in there. Okay, I guess we do have one. Stefan, are you here? Are you able to tell us a bit more about this?
Yes, I'm here. And there's already a PR open for it. So it's a bug in cluster cuddle that when somebody sets ---- target namespace, it's only applied to the normal resources and not to the webhook configurations and not to the CRD. And yeah, there's a PR open for it to fix it and already has reviews. So I assume it won't take long to get merged.
Okay, great. Thanks. Sounds like we should wait for that as well for 041 then. All right, open proposals. I don't know if we have any major updates on any of these. Does anyone have any updates or any announcements, any requests for reviews for any of these proposals or any new proposals that should be added? Rajashri?
Oh yeah, I don't have any updates, just request for reviews for the external HCD one, which is the last one in the 050 release. That's it.
All right, thanks. Please take a look. And this is the link to the PR, correct? Yes, okay. Perfect. Do we have any updates on load balancer provider? I know this had been taken over by some people. Nadir?
Yeah, what Joel said, there's no updates yet, but we are starting in earnest this week. We've been having some sideband discussions in Slack. So yeah, do reach out if you've got anything you want to add.
Sounds good, thanks. I think I'm going to move this, or I guess this can still be 04X if it's non-breaking. Yeah, okay, I'll leave it in here for now. But we should circle back on the spot instance proposal. It's been marked as needs review for a while, so if anyone has time, please take a look. All right, let's get going on the discussion topics then. Stefan, you have the first one, go ahead.
Yes, already posted something about it on Friday, I think, in Slack. There's an issue open. We currently have kubeadm config and kubeadm config template mutable, or let's say the webhooks allow that they are mutable, but we treat them as immutable, so we never roll out changes to those. And the issue is about asking if we should implement, if we should make them immutable now, or if we should wait until the next release. So basically the question, is it a UX bug that it's not immutable, so we can fix it now? Or is it a breaking change, and should we wait?
Okay, so let me just rephrase to make sure I understand. The issue is that right now, if you update a kubeadm config template, it will not actually trigger rolling updates, right? So the update is basically ignored and only applied to new machines that come up. So the question is, should we mark it as immutable so that it's not a bug, a UX bug, where you expect it to be, your machines to be updated, but they don't actually get updated? But it's a breaking change because it changes the API mutability. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. So it's we don't need to fix it now. We don't have any hard dependency on that. It's just a question how we want to handle that.
I see Vince wrote breaking change in the chat.
Yeah, it's definitely a breaking change. Like, it's a big behavioral change because, as you mentioned, like if you change a template, the new machine that will come up actually will come up with a new template. So technically, like we're breaking some users that might be relying on this behavior. Discussion for another time, I guess, would be if we should support either like behavior, but
Arun?
So I have a fundamental question. Whenever we deal with things like this, do we also make the other control plane configurations immutable, or do we do it only for kubeadm? And perhaps I'm not understanding this right, but I'm just wondering, whenever we want to make a change, like wherein we actually take one control plane provider and make that manifest immutable, do we also spread it to the other control plane providers?
So this isn't the control plane provider. This is the kubeadm config template, which is the Bootstrap template, Bootstrap provider template, kubeadm Bootstrapper. So that's a good question in general. Like, does anyone want to take a stab at this? Or my understanding is that it doesn't need to apply to every provider as long as it's not part of the contract. So like if it's a change to the Bootstrap provider contract that says Bootstrap providers should not be mutable, that's different. But I think in this case, like for example, we have the same thing with infrastructure providers where machine templates can behave in different ways. And there are some infrastructure provider which enforce this in webhooks. Like for example, Azure has a webhook validation that makes the Azure machine template immutable, so you can't change it. But some other infrastructure providers don't have that enforced. So it's not something that is necessarily strictly required. It's up to each provider to. Zach?
Hey, so just curious, if we were to do this, would the proper way to update be, I guess, to have your KCP reference a new kubeadmin config if you needed to update that kubeadmin config, and then that would trigger a upgrade?
Yeah, so the current experience is you have to create a new config template and then make those changes that you want in that new one, and then change the reference in the whatever is using that template to point to the new template. And that will trigger rolling upgrades.
Yeah.
Vince?
Yeah, so like from a moralistic point of view, like we need to, I guess, like think about like for the next version, given that like this is not like a thing right now, like what we want to make mutable in these templates, if anything, because some folks actually have asked for some mutability from the infrastructure provider, for example, adding a security group, I do agree that's like probably not ideal to roll out an entire machine deployment to just add a security group, because you probably want to add it in place. The tricky part here is that like the current API capabilities that we don't have a way to mark a field as like mutable and at the same time give a signal to machine deployment and the cluster API controller, which know nothing about the CRT, that was a natural change that was mutable, like in place, rather than like a rolling upgrade. So we'll need to think about it, like how do we deal with something like that? And maybe it's like a contract change between cluster API and providers, or it's like something more complex.
So in the meantime, I know that we had some documentation about how to update a infrastructure machine template. Do we have, do we have an equivalent for kubeadm config? If not, that might be good. So that behavior is at least documented and not completely hidden. Fabrizio?
It should be documented in 1.6 Kubernetes control base control plane management. I would only 1.6. Okay, I will only point out that this issue is not about KCP, because KCP does not have a reference to the Kubernetes control plane. It embeds the configuration, and inside KCP, it is already mutable. Okay, what we are talking about is the Kubernetes config or the Kubernetes config template, which is referenced by machine deployment or by machines.
Right, so this document is for the control plane. So we should probably have a separate one that talks about kubeadm config templates, which are not mutable, which is different from KCP.
And this is below changing a machine template.
Okay. We should probably include kubeadm config though in there, because it specifically talks about, does it include?
Probably.
Yeah, infrastructure.
Okay, what they're saying is that it explains about the infrastructure provider, but not the bootstrap one. Okay.
Yeah, I think as a new user, it might not be clear that this applies to. Okay, so yeah, if someone can just take note of this in the issue, I'll keep going, but we should document this ideally and then revisit for the next milestone. Okay, cool. Next, do we have any other questions or comments on this topic before we move on? All right, Mike, you have the next one, auto scaling.
Yeah, we're back for another round of auto scaling from zero. First of all, thanks to everybody who added comments there. There was some really good discussion going on. And I want, one of the questions that's coming up that we're going back and forth on now is kind of like, should we have a proper API field for these resource hints, or should we maybe just use annotations? Let me, give a little background here. So for everyone who's kind of, just getting into this, we're talking about how the cluster autoscaler could do scale from zero using cluster API. And this is a feature that exists in the upstream autoscaler for, any provider who wants to implement it. Not all providers do. And we need to surface information about the nodes that are created, specifically their CPU usage, their memory usage, any special resources like GPUs or whatever. And this is currently difficult for us to do because of the way that we embed, infrastructure templates and whatnot. So, the idea has been to make a clear field where we could just say, this is the CPU, this is the memory, et cetera, for any given machine template. And in OpenShift, we've implemented this by having annotations on our machine sets. So we only use machine sets in OpenShift. So we just add an annotation there that has this information. And that inspired some of the override mechanism that I put into the, into the enhancement in hopes that we could contribute that back. Now the discussion has kind of come full circle, and, Stefan presented an interesting point, which is like, could we just do the annotations and maybe put them on machine deployments, machine sets, and possibly infrastructure templates, any one of those places. And then the autoscaler could use that to inform its simulation of how to scale up. In the past, I shied away from just taking the annotation approach because I had been given advice that, annotations are weak APIs in Kubernetes, and we can't validate against them, these type of things. So it would be better to have an optional field, perhaps, in something like the infrastructure machine template, because that's closer to the provider and you could put all the specific information there. So anyways, with that background kind of talked about now, I'm curious to hear, maybe Fabrizio and Stefan, if there's any more thought about, if we could just use annotations, like if we decided just to use annotations on machine sets or machine deployments as the first implementation of this feature, then, I could almost just contribute the code that we have now in OpenShift and just like propose a PR to the autoscaler. That would be the easiest way to do it. No, yeah, Cecile, unfortunately, machine pools are not yet included in the cluster autoscaler. I know this comes up every time we talk about this, but we need a little more work to get machine pools fully integrated into the autoscaler, and mainly around the mappings to the nodes and whatnot.
Sorry, my question was, I'm fully aware of this. My question was more like, would this also help us down the line once we have autoscaler support for machine pools to also be able to extend this to machine pools more easily?
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Yeah. I thought maybe you were just having a little fun with me there, but honestly, the path that I would like to see us go to really get machine pools in, and I realize we're going a little astray now, is I think we need to come up with a cluster autoscaling resource that we would use. And that would actually help us unlock some of this functionality, because then we could create arbitrary mappings between what the cluster autoscaler sees in terms of replica sizes for node groups and what the backend implementation wants to expose for node mappings. So something the autoscaler wants to be able to do is pick a node and tell the backend provider to delete it. So for machine pools, we would have to come up with a way to kind of surface that information. And I think if we could create, a singular auto-scaling resource, that would allow us to actually kind of subsume machine sets, machine deployments, and machine pools, in addition to whatever we come up in the future. So I think it's kind of sidereal to this or tangential to this, but it could help.
Okay. Fabrizio had his hand up first. Go ahead, Fabrizio.
Yeah, just answering to the question on annotation or explicit API. So I don't have strong reference. My only comment with regard to this is that I would avoid to suggest the user to put an annotation on machine set or machine, because they basically manage, they can go away whenever you do a rollout or stuff like that. This means that the user has to continuously add this kind of information. I also have a background question. I try to clarify on the PR, but I'm not sure that I was probably pretty clear, because from what I understand, the autoscaler is already capable to go to work if an instance is there, and to make his own calculation about how many nodes are there. So if an instance is there, the autoscaler works. The problem is scaling to 0. But because when scaling to 0, the autoscaler cannot do a proper calculation of the number of required nodes. My suggestion is that, but why we need to do the calculation? Whenever we are at 0 machine and we are required to scale, let's start scaling to 1 without any calculation. As soon as the autoscale, then the the machine deployment gets to 1, then we are done. That's mean that we can even make it work without adding information to the types. That's my. I don't know the autoscaler internal, so I may be totally wrong, but the idea is just to get out to the corner case and then let everything work as of today.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a great question, Fabrizio. And I know like we're really getting into the internals of the autoscaler here, but yeah, like essentially, you're right. Like the autoscaler should be able just to say like, increase this node group by 1, and that node group knows what size the machines are. So it just increases itself, right? But what happens before that is the autoscaler has a simulator that it runs where it tries to simulate if I could add a node from any of the node groups that I know about, would this pod fit that node? And so when a group is at 0, it uses that like that hinting resource information to basically do that calculation. And so there's an interface inside of the cluster autoscaler that each provider implements where they have to like return that information back. And that allows the cluster autoscaler to do these type of calculations from 0. I mean, it's possible that, it's possible that we could have our autoscaler implementation perhaps do more introspection into the node groups that it has and maybe try to automatically surface this information. But it's going to get complicated when we get to the provider level, because like I might just, like if I look at the AWS provider, it might just say MX4 large or something, right? And then I wouldn't know what that would mean necessarily. Whereas the vSphere provider would tell me, this many CPUs, this much memory, and this much other things. So that'd be easier, so like part of this is trying to make it so that we have a common abstraction for how we expose this information to the autoscaler. But without changing the way the autoscaler works in the core, we wouldn't be able to have it skip that simulation phase. Like the autoscaler needs to kind of run this simulation and figure out if it can place the pod that it sees as unscheduled. Otherwise it'll do something different if it can't place it. Does that help at all, I guess?
Yeah, if this means to touch the core autoscaler, I got your point. Thank you.
I mean, yeah, that would be the tough part, is we would have to add an extra kind of processing conditional. And I doubt the upstream folks would want to do that just for our provider. But I could dig deeper on this, but it seemed like if we could just do annotations or something, we could probably solve this for ourselves, at least for now,
No, this is fine for me. Thank you for clarifying this point.
Cool.
All right, so David, then Vince, then Arun.
Yeah, so I'll just give a real quick kind of related topic. We have been doing some work on machine pool, machine proposal, and should probably be able to open it up before we meet next. And this should give us, should at least give us a place to start that conversation about how do we delete an instance out of a machine pool, and how do we kind of bridge that difference between deployments, machine deployments, and machine pools. We'll open up a Google Doc here before we meet next time.
Yeah, cool. I mean, I welcome that discussion, David. I think, again, my kind of feeling is it pushes us more towards having a better auto scaling resource that we could use for this stuff. But yeah, I welcome that discussion.
Vince?
So the fields versus the annotations, like, if I understand this correctly, though, like this is something that the user has to set, is that correctly, before creating the machine?
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, this like ideally, yeah, the user would need to set this up before creating. Well, they could add it to a machine set after they already created it, but yeah, the user would have to set this up essentially.
Yeah, so like I honestly like find that a little bit like error prone, especially like if you change like the underlying machine, then those values like won't be updated and things like that. So the idea that Fabrizio had, like to, I guess, like to scale up, like I don't know like if we could make that fit, but like that could be like a good start. The other thing that I was thinking is like maybe each machine from, or like machine, I guess like infrastructure machine template from a provider, like it should give out that information if it does have it. And if we don't have it, we just don't support like from zero, I guess, scaling, or like, I don't know, like if there is like a safe fallback that we could fall into, like that, if it doesn't have that information, because you can always change like a machine template from one machine to another, and like, I don't know, maybe you don't want GPUs on there anymore, and then like someone forgets to change the annotation or the field, because this is actually keeping state in two places. And usually we try to really avoid doing things like that, because it, confuses like most of the users.
I mean, I agree with you.
More work for the infrastructure providers for sure, though.
Right. And so some of this kind of depends on where your infrastructure templates come from in terms of usability. Like if you had all those created for you, then, yeah, then that information presumably would already be in there. I also agree with you about not duplicating this information. That's why, and there's a number of issues kind of bundled in here, and we're kind of at a stopgap to get to the next point, because like, if we're doing this just with annotations, then yeah, it's going to be very user error prone, and the user experience may not be great. And again, like this is kind of like the next step would be to create some automation to put these annotations on for us, which is something that we do in OpenShift currently, to help make it so the user doesn't make these mistakes. So
what I was thinking though is like, it's like not that the user will still put them on the infrastructure template. I was more like thinking like maybe we could have like the infrastructure template to be reconciled somehow, and then the status will be updated with what the provider thinks. I don't know how many GPUs, memory, and CPUs does that machine have, because most of the providers will have that information.
Yeah, that's something that we talked about like earlier on in this, was having this exposed in the status part of the infrastructure object, and then yeah, allowing each provider to populate that information, as they see fit. I'm fine to go back that direction. That's going to put like more responsibility on the providers. I think if I would be happy to do that, have it come out of the status, if we could also have the override on the machine set or machine deployment, because then that would allow people to start using it like more immediately, I guess.
Arun?
Yeah, so this is somewhat similar to Vince's question. As in, so far we have used machine template to describe everything except the compute. So if I have the same kind of machine but different computes, do I need to replicate the machine template just with the compute changed repeatedly, or can we have a set of policies? Because right now it's a clear distinction between machine with respect to all of the other operating, essentially the non-hardware template. And can the hardware template be provided, because it's a matrix, right? Ultimately you have different machines templates, and you have different, and each can provide a set of compute policies. In our infra providers, essentially the OS and other things are distinct from the hardware. So it's you can take any hardware and patch any OS for it potentially. So it's like take any compute profile you want and patch a machine template and it should work. But in this case, we have to provide the whole matrix. So do you have a thought about that? Is that okay? Or
well, if I understand the question, this is kind of about like heterogeneous versus homogeneous node groups. And the way the autoscaler currently looks at things, the autoscaler wants to see homogeneous groups of nodes. So like when we have a machine set or a machine deployment that gets exposed to the autoscaler, then all the nodes in that machine set are assumed to be the same type, right? So we would never have a mixed infrastructure reference within a node group, right? So like if you had two different compute capacities or something, and you wanted to autoscale both sets of those capacities, you would have to have them as separate, kind of groups. And I realize this is kind of like, this is looking at it in a very serial way almost. It doesn't get into some of these new abstractions we're talking about, like machine pools or heterogeneous compute clusters and stuff like that, but this is the way the autoscaler works now. So we have to kind of match what it's doing at the moment, I guess.
So if I understand correctly, so the autoscaler thinks only about the compute part, and is the machine set the right place to put the compute part? That is the question, because it scales with respect to compute. The node group is only the compute, right? And the
Right.
machine set is.
I mean, like if we could somehow surface this information on a machine set or a machine deployment, that would ultimately be the easiest to implement in the autoscaler, because we're already reconciling those objects in the autoscaler, right? So like we would already have that information there. But the problem is the machine sets and machine deployments aren't really controlled by the individual providers. So there's no really, without adding another step where we reconcile from a provider specific object, like an infrastructure template, out to the machine set template, that starts to, this is one of these duplicating information and we have to synchronize it. And it just seemed like that was way too complicated for what we're trying to do.
And one more small follow-up question, and we can follow up in Slack if this doesn't work. So the cluster autoscaler for the CAPI and the workload cluster on its own, they are identical binary wise, correct?
Correct, yeah.
So in that case, this functionality will be added only for the CAPI world and not for a plain workload cluster. So was there a reason why we didn't, why this more fundamental approach was not taken? Or
I think maybe I misunderstood your question on the PR, because I remember this question you asked, like, yeah, this is CAPI specific, the feature we're adding, but it's because every provider in the cluster autoscaler has to provide scale from 0 on their own. So like everybody has to provide this on their own. We're providing it, through this mechanism for cluster API. Now, in terms of workload or management, like it'll work on any cluster autoscaler that you use the CAPI backend with. So whether you're using a joined cluster or you're using a management workload cluster, like this feature will work for any of those.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks.
And I realize we spent a lot of time on this at this point. Like, I'm not sure I have a resolution, but I'm happy to move on and continue discussing this on the PR.
Thanks.
Great, sounds good. Let's do that. Thanks for all the great discussion. Fabrizio, you have the next one. Go ahead.
So this is about cluster class and especially the impact on the provider and the ongoing PR for implementing new template class for new template types for cluster classes, but more specifically the infrastructure cluster template and eventually the control plane template. So there was a lot of discussion and trying to address and make more clarity around this point. I opened a PR which amended the proposal. And the proposal basically documents what are the impact for the provider, documents what are the convention that we are following and that we have to continue to follow when implementing templates. And also it provides some clarification about how cluster class is going to reconcile templates with the generated object. The LDR is that template field could be a subset of the field in the object. So I can have additional field in the object and then in the template. Validation rule must be consistent because when I clone a template to create an object, the operation should succeed. But really more detail are on the PR, and I will be happy to answer to any question. The other interesting part that we are documenting is how templates are reconciled, and the interesting and what we are assuming to do is that basically we are going to enforce only the fields that are explicitly defined in the template object. That means that if someone does not define something in the template, the user or other controller will be free to set them in the object. There are some, let me say, corner case detail about omit empty and how JSON serialization work, API conversion. They are all in the PR. Please take a look, and I'm looking for feedback for this.
Thanks. Do we have any questions for Fabrizio on this? So this is just to document basically the new things we've come across in the last few PRs, correct, in the proposal, but it's not making any changes to the proposal that we haven't already discussed.
Exactly. This is a clarification and
Okay.
adding more detail. Talking about the detail that we are going to add, we are also making it really clear that cluster class will work only with control plane provider that support version. This is the only requirement. And the only, let me say, restriction that now is super hopefully clear in the proposal, and it also was clarified that the cluster class could work with control plane provider not supporting replica or control plane provider not backed by machine. So, which is a follow-up of last week discussion. So I tried, let me say, to collect feedback, condensate them into the proposal, so we don't lose track, and hopefully we unblock the pending PR.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you. All right, and if, by the way, if you're newish to this community and you don't know what cluster class is, or you have no idea what we're talking about, highly encourage you to check out the proposal. It's already merged. It's the same one that Fabrizio is making amendments to, but this is basically a new way of provisioning clusters in like a simplified way to have like cluster stamps. So yeah, check it out. If you have any questions, reach out on Slack. Cool. Any other questions or comments on this topic? All right, if not, let's move on. Shukong, I'm very sorry if I mispronounced your name.
Yeah, your pronounce actually pretty good.
Thanks.
Yeah, my name is Shou-Cong, so it's very similar to what you just pronounced. Okay, so I just want to say some very quick hello from Databricks, because we have a group of engineers who will join and start contributing to this community. We'll do some I'll give some very quick introduction about what Databricks is, what our team is, and then also maybe then our team member do a very quick self-introduction, and then maybe we will try to seek some of your guidance or suggestion about how we can get started in this awesome community. This is this topic. Does it sound good? Cool. Okay, cool. Yeah. Okay. A little bit introduction. You probably see a bunch of names on the attendee list that from Databricks. That is we are all from the multi-cloud platform organization in Databricks. And Databricks is a company that is focusing on data and AI. So our company's our co-founder was the original creator of Apache Spark. And then we are also we are also very heavy in the open source community. We open source a lot of project like MLflow, Delta Lake, a bunch of things. We also we are now running on all three clouds. We run on AWS, Azure, and GCP, and we use Kubernetes every day. Now we Databricks is also growing fast. It's we are currently a 28 billion valuation company. But so we are still growing. And then one of the pain point we hit as the growth is the growing pain, that we start managing more and more Kubernetes cluster. And then we expect they will even scale up. So we start thinking about how we can manage Kubernetes in our future architecture. And then we evaluate a bunch of the solution in the market, and then it turns out the cluster API seems to be the best fit for us. So that's why we want to join the community, work together with you, and make cluster API project more successful. Also, if hopefully that can also make it try to put our use case, if possible, that could be supported natively from the community. that's where we are from. So for us, we already internally, we already founded a big team working on this project, and it is becoming one of our top priority in our organization. So that's why you see a bunch of people, they will be working close to full time on this project in the next few months. So hopefully you will expect a lot of PR coming from us in the next few months. So this is we try to do some introduction and make you familiar with this name. So sometimes you will see, oh, this is not a strange people just submitting merging random PR. So that's where we that's a quick introduction about our team. I mean, we can do some very quick self-introduction as well. Maybe let me start because since I'm already talking, and then we can go through them. I can do maybe 10-second introduction. So my name is Shou. So I've joined Databricks about a little bit over 1 year. I'm the tech lead of the cloud infrastructure team, and in Databricks, I'm also driving this new our second generation of infrastructure management that will work a lot with Kubernetes. Maybe we can go over as the name in this list.
Hey guys, I'm Anders. So I joined the Databricks around March, only a couple months here. Previously, I worked in Azure Kubernetes Service, AKS, and I worked with some of you guys before. So yeah, super excited to work with Cluster API. I like it a lot.
Hi, my name is David. I've been at Databricks for a few months. Before that, I worked at Google on Kubernetes, worked on the Kubernetes scheduler in the very early days, and a number of other pieces of Kubernetes while at Google, and then had more recently started working on Anthos at Google. Yeah, I'm looking forward to working with the Cluster API community.
Eric, are you there?
Yep. Hi, everyone. My name is Eric. I'm one of the managers working with teams focused on this new initiative around scalable management of our Kubernetes clusters. Yeah, I've been with Databricks for a long time, but yeah, really excited to work with everyone here.
Yeah, hi, everyone. My name is Mei-Xin. So I'm being at Databricks for almost 3 years. So I will be on the new team, driving this effort. We use Cluster API to manage our clusters, and meanwhile, we will try to contribute back to the Cluster API community. Yeah, we will work closely in the future. Yeah, very excited.
Hey everyone, my name is Philip. I've been at Databricks for a little over 2 years. Same team as Eric and Mei-Xin and Shou and Richard. So yeah, super excited to work with you all.
Hey everyone, my name is Richard. I've been at Databricks for a few months. I'll be working on the same initiative on the same team as Philip, Mei-Xin, etc. Very excited to get to know the community and hope to contribute to the community in the future. Yeah, thanks.
Cool. Thank you very much for the introduction. And yeah, we are really excited. I feel like this is a very important project that can help the community a lot. And then we also want to contribute back and also work with you together. So some of our question, maybe some very quick question, because we are relatively new to this project. So please forgive us if we didn't understand some of a process or policy well. Please teach us. So just want to understand if we want to study any we already read the documentation. We understand the design of the Cluster API, some basic design, for sure, not the every piece of design. But if we want to start contributing, what could you recommend us to any kind of process we need to follow? Also, we want to hear a little bit of your suggestion about what's the style that we can manage our code, because on our side, we have a relatively tight timeline. So internally, we will want to use it as some of our project delivery. So we will likely start with some of the forking internally, but we also want to eventually merge this PR as much as possible into the upstream. So we don't need to deal with like this forking and rebasing business as a maintenance. So if other people have gone through the similar process, I'm very eager to hear like what's your suggestion? Like how do you feel like this will become productive?
Okay, so a few things. So first of all, welcome. It's really great to have you all. Excited to work with all of you. I'll take the first part of the question and then I'll let Vince take the second part. So in terms of getting started processes, we do try to keep our contributing doc really up to date.
Okay.
So if you haven't gone through that, this is probably the best place to go. You'll probably want to check out our proposal process, which is a little like it's pretty similar to the KEP process in Kubernetes, if you're familiar with that, but we have our own little twist on it. And then in terms of like the PR process and the release process, it should all be documented in here. So breaking changes also worth checking out. So I'd recommend looking at this. That's the first part. And then Vince, do you want to take the next part of the question?
Yeah, I hope I remember the next part of the question. But so yeah, first of all, welcome. Like with open arms, like more contributors. This is awesome. In addition to what Sil said, like I'm not sure like how much like you have like cluster API, but if you're starting, like definitely suggest to start from 0.4. 0.3 is our current like stable support release, but it's also in maintenance mode at this point. So we only backport like bug fixes to it.
Okay.
But 0.4 just got released, so we're planning on a patch version soon. And we have extensive end-to-end tests like throughout like the code base. In terms of contributing, like we usually don't accept the breaking changes until the next minor release. There is 0.5, it is planned, but like we're probably going to do 0.5 and alpha 5 types, but we're not planning, well, we haven't put it on the calendar yet. We usually have like a couple releases or like alpha releases. So far we've done a couple per year, but like I'm not sure like if like we're gonna do this the alpha 5 like by the end of the year, like early next year. Thanks for pointing out, like we're also like talking about the beta 1, so like how do we get to more stable APIs and like what would our next version of the APIs look like. And we're focusing like a lot right now on the user experience. So definitely get familiar with cluster class. If you're managing tons of clusters, cluster class with it in its current form and in the form that it's going to get into by the end of the year, will be super beneficial for you folks. And on that one, you could probably like give us tons of feedback as well. In terms of like feature additions, we usually discuss it in Slack and then open issues. Issues are usually like really well maintained. We do grooming sessions every once in a while. So yeah, like usually an issue has attached a milestone. If we want that feature to go into that milestone, for backward compatible changes, we would accept like new additions to, for example, to APIs after discussing. And yeah, like communication is like, I think it's one of like our greatest strengths in this community. We do communicate a lot through GitHub issues. I would say like our biggest block or slowdown right now, it's actually reviewers. There's a handful of us that actually do review all the PRs that are coming through, or most of them. So there is also like an opportunity for you folks to actually help us and get into the reviewer group if you're interested in that. You know, with great power comes great responsibilities. So like there's some expectations when you're a reviewer to answer, you know, to be active more in PR reviews. And yeah, I think I'm also happy to chat offline a little bit more and yeah, if you folks need like another set of eyes on architectural diagram, I'm sure that we can find some time with a smaller group of folks.
Yeah, +1 on the PR reviews. Definitely need help there. And also, I would, David pointed out nightlies in the chat. That's something, yeah, I would maybe suggest you think about. Consider instead of like forking and having to maintain a fork and rebases and all of that, we do have nightly builds. So that would be something that might help you maintain that fast iteration at the beginning without losing the benefit of upstream.
So nightly, right? Okay.
Yeah, so every commit that gets merged gets also built and published in our staging environment.
Yeah, and other thing is, I don't think anyone from Giant Swarm is on the call, but they also like begin their journey with Cluster API pretty recently. They had a bunch of blog posts about it, about their experience. So it might be good to like talk to them and see if they have any tips or anything that they learned as new contributors. They might have a fresher perspective than some of us who've been in the project for a few years. So yeah, thanks for introducing all of yourselves, and hope we can help you get active on the project quickly, and let us know if you have any other questions. We're all active in Slack, so if you're in the Cluster API channel, that's the best place to reach out.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the very warm welcome and the suggestion. I have one last question. Just as I just told a moment ago, like Databricks is all three clouds. So we also have a GCP business need. I know there's a pretty good support from AWS and Azure in the Cluster API. So I just wondering, like, is that if we also want to work on like a GCP or GKE support in Cluster API, is there any like what's the current state there? How can we get started there as well? Because we consider that might be one area maybe we can contribute at first or a lot at the beginning.
Yeah, huge 10,000% yes. So we don't have actually any active maintainer except for Carlos on GCP, which I don't know. Yeah, it's in the maintainer list, but like I'm not sure like if is it like an ongoing commitment or not. So if I remember correctly, GCP still needs to be updated to 0.4 or like
no, it is on V1 Alpha 4.
But it wasn't released, right? Yeah, it wasn't released. So like the main branch is actually on 0.4, but like there's no release on 0.4 yet. In terms of like the state it's in, I want to put like a huge warning sign. This was like initially like some sort of weekend project, which turned out into a provider. So there is tests in terms of end-to-end tests, which are actually also Kubernetes release informing. But the code itself, like it needs like more love and just like lots of like testing inside, like in terms of integrations and unit tests. The other thing that it probably needs, like you probably will find like that it's limiting in how it sets up like the cloud provider itself. So you might need like new features and things like that. And I don't know like if folks are like using this extensively. So there is like probably some leeway to do like lots of changes, especially right now that the main branch it's accepting breaking changes given it hasn't released yet.
Fabrizio?
You can.
First of all, welcome. Very looking forward to work together. Talking about GC, it definitely needs more hands and help there. And I would only to highlight the opportunity that if we can get GC in good shape, then it will be easier to get into the upstream Kubernetes test grid. And so we will get GC as Kubernetes as a release blocking for Kubernetes, which will be definitely a win-win for this community.
Okay. Okay, so basically, my understanding here is like it seems like you are open for contributing for this GCP. Currently, it is relatively it requires a little bit more work, right? And then also the user base is relatively smaller, so we probably will need to build some of our tasks. We cannot just rely on the user to battle test it at this moment. Is it a reasonable understanding?
Yeah, okay. And each provider also has its own Slack channel. So the Cluster API GCP channel is probably also a good place to start to reach out to folks who are maybe focused on the GCP provider.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, on our side, like our next milestone, we will want to have Azure and GCP work. So probably these are the two areas we will start first. And probably a quarter later, we will also start working on AWS. But this is like the plan on our side. But we will give us some time. We will ramp up, and then you will start seeing PRs from us. Cool.
Sounds good. All right.
That's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you. And this was our last topic. So unless anyone has any last-minute additions, this will conclude our meeting. So thanks all for coming, and see you all next week.